Good morning, and welcome to Innovate and Caffeinate. My name is Michael Ramage. I'm the director of the Center for Computer and Information Technology at Murray State University. And on behalf of Grow West, Innovate and Caffeinate Hopkins County, Innovate and Caffeinate Christian County, and Innovate and Caffeinate Murray Callaway County, we welcome you to today's Innovate and Caffeinate session. While we wish that we could be having these meetings in person, the virtual environment allows us to reach outside of our Grow West footprint and find entrepreneurs across the state and across the region that can share with us in ways that may not be possible in person. And today is one of those sessions. Today we are welcomed by Brad Flowers. Brad is from Lexington, where he is a partner at Bullhorn Creative, and he's the author of the naming book. And before we get into our discussion, let me say that the naming book, we have a copy of it today to give away. So as we walk through our conversation, and we're just going to have a chat and have a little bit of question and answer time, feel free to share our feed on Facebook. Feel free to ask questions. All of those things we're going to look at the end of the session, see who is active on social media. And from that group of activity, we will give away a copy of the naming book. So certainly make sure you're active so that you can get put into the drawing. But with that, Brad, thanks for joining us today. And let me just start off the bat with a general question and just ask you, share a little bit of your entrepreneur journey with us.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I'm really excited for the conversation. So my entrepreneurial journey is probably a little, I don't know, probably unorthodox. It started off when I was a kid. I liked to read books. And as I kind of kept going, I enjoyed reading novels specifically. And no one really ever told me there was a job other than teaching other people who like to read books. So I got a degree in English literature, and I was taking a break to apply to PhD programs. And while I was taking the break, I took a job at a bicycle shop. And when I was there, eventually I ended up managing the shop. And I learned two, in retrospect, really important things. One, I learned that I didn't really like to teach, which was sort of a problem for someone who didn't really have a backup plan. And two, I learned to my surprise that I was really interested in business. And so as managing the shop, I got to kind of understand all aspects, from purchasing to understanding marketing to sales, all of those sorts of things. And so I was particularly drawn to the marketing side. And so that kind of brings us to the summer of 2008. I was managing the bike shop, and I kind of felt like I had just kind of reached my growth capacity there, and I was ready for something else. And so I thought I'd leave that job. So I quit a perfectly good job in the summer of 2008, just assuming I'd be able to find something in PR or marketing. And as the economy slowly got worse throughout that year, it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen. And so I ended up becoming kind of a reluctant entrepreneur. That fall, a friend and I thought, well, the job market's not great, but there's certainly opportunity, as at that time, lots of new businesses were starting. People were trying to think through. And so really, in some ways, it's a time not terribly dissimilar from now, where while there was a lot of disruption, there was still a lot of opportunity for those people who are kind of eager to go get it. And so we started with the idea that we would have a marketing company. We kind of thought initially that it would be probably event-based marketing, and we kind of quickly learned that there wasn't really a lot of money in that for us at that time. And so we kind of, I think we think about it looking back in kind of three ways. Our growth is, we've kind of looked at what are we good at, what kind of projects go well, what can we make money doing, and then what kind of is a positive impact for our community, what creates some benefit to the community. And so as we analyzed each year, as we analyzed each project, we would look at kind of where is the intersection of those three things. And that's really how we've grown to today, where now there are 15 of us here. We have an office in Louisville and Lexington. And now we're working distributed across the country.
Well, let me ask a question. As you're building your business, as you're
Mm-hmm.
growing it, was there a point that you finally had some comfort, some you can breathe, you think you're over the hump, you're going to make it? Have
Mm-hmm.
you found that point? Are you still
Mm.
looking for that point?
I thought I had. No, I'm joking. Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about that earlier today. I read about a guy one time where, and his point was when he went to the grocery store and he realized he could buy anything he wanted at the grocery store. He realized that he had made it and like everything was going to be fine. I don't think I had anything that pointed. I guess probably the biggest milestone for us was when maturation wise was when it was the founder and I when we went on salary. And I think when you kind of transition from paying yourself month to month, with whatever is left, to actually taking a salary, that I think that looking back, that at the time it felt like really risky and I was kind of nervous about it, but looking back, that's really probably the biggest maturation point where we switched from kind of like cobbling it together to like, this thing is a real business. We're going to make it work. We have payroll. We have systems in place to meet payroll. So I think that was probably it.
And on your website, there's a couple of things that struck me. The first was, it says that you build impact brands with language and design. So what do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, they're kind of two pieces. One is the language and design piece. So for us, like a general philosophy about branding is that we think without strong language, design is really just decoration. And without strong design, language falls flat. And so we think in order to do a good job for our clients that we have to approach it with both. And so on any project, there will be a person coming from the language side and a person coming from the design side, which is something that makes us a little bit unique. Most branding companies start, often there's a designer, that designer does well, they hire another designer. And so they tend to be really visually focused, where I think one of our differentiators is the language component. And I'm biased that way because it's what I do. I think about language all the time, but I do think it's something that separates us. And then the other side of that is the impact side. And so we think about another place on the site, it says branding is ethically neutral, but we're not. And so I mean, you can probably think about situations where companies or entities have used branding for all sorts of nefarious purposes. And so I think we're just honest that what we do isn't inherently virtuous. And so because of that, we have to do two things. One, we have to run the company to the best of our abilities and kind of try to run it as ethically as possible. And then two, we have to seek out like-minded clients. And I think when we say we're looking for like social impact companies or impact companies, sometimes that can be a little off-putting. But I think really what we mean is we're looking for organizations who acknowledge that when you're operating a business, you create impact. And often those impacts are good. You're creating jobs. That's great. Economic stability. But also in the business activities are also negative impacts. Whether it's pollution or whatever it happens to be for your particular thing. So really, we're looking for companies that acknowledge that they're kind of creating both kinds of impacts and are seeking to kind of maximize the positive and minimize the negative.
So two more questions on that.
Yeah.
First of all, the types of clients that you focus on, size-wise, large companies, small companies, nonprofits, for-profits. Is there any particular area that you all look at in particular?
We work, no, really, if a company's working in that social impact space or an organization, we work with a wide range. So that ranges from, there's a startup in Eastern Kentucky called App Harvest, which is building these massive high-tech greenhouses. So we did the brand work for them. We work with established companies. We've worked with universities. We work with the city of Lexington. So we do work across a pretty wide swath of business types and industry types. as long as it's kind of in that impact space, we feel like we can do a good job, and our process can be flexible to meet the needs, whether it's 5 people who are decision makers, or whether it's a university and there are 40,000 people who are pretty bought into the brand.
And that really brings me to a bigger, maybe philosophical question. You mentioned earlier, what are you good at, where you can make money, and then the positive impact on your community.
Yeah.
That last aspect is not the typical component that businesses think through when starting a business. Why was that important to you and your partner?
I think it's just kind of who we were. Thinking about it, it was never really a conscious decision to start thinking about that. I think when you think about, it's more and more common to talk about values-driven companies or values-driven organizations. And I think if I think about how we were values-driven, it was really something that started with us as the only 2 people in the organization. And then as we grew, we sought out people who kind of had values alignment. And then eventually we became a B Corp, which a B Corp is sort of like USDA organic is for agriculture. B Corp is like, just comes in and certifies that we are actually doing what we say we do. And then, so it's been kind of a transition. I don't think we've always kind of nailed it. But I think it's just who we are. It's been kind of a natural extension. It was never like a really strategic business decision. It was sort of like, look, if we're going to do this, this is just one of the things that has to happen.
Which I like that. I like that a lot, that it's who you are. And if other businesses could take that same attitude, our communities would be a better place, frankly.
Yeah, I think, and I think we've seen that, we need strong businesses to build resilient communities. Like, I think we've seen more in the last 8 months how that's true. It's like all of the problems we're facing, it can't be, the government can't fix everything, nonprofits can't fix everything, businesses can't fix everything, but it's an interconnected system. And I think if we're all kind of focusing on these things, that we can actually create more resilient communities that can be strong and rebound from kind of these like traumatic events that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in this time, how have you all survived through this time? Is the business changing? Are you seeing more business, less business? Are you having to adapt the way that you're conducting business?
Yeah, we're adapting some for sure. I think the biggest thing we've seen is, in uncertainty, people take longer to make decisions. And so when we look at our kind of leading indicators, which is a way we talk about some of the things, the numbers we look at, not like a number of dollars in the sales pipeline would be a leading indicator of whether we're going to have money in 6 months. Those sort of numbers are all really good. But what we're seeing is, while those numbers are good, they can be misleading because people aren't making decisions as quickly. So a couple of things we've done is, one, we have switched a little bit. Historically, we've been primarily project-based. So we come in, we do a project, we hand over the guidelines, the brand manual, and then we're kind of finished. But what we've realized it's been maybe a little longer than just the last 8 months, probably the last year and a half, is that a lot of our clients have ongoing needs. And we've really shifted the business towards sticking around with clients after the project to help launch in the best way possible. And we found that we're really able to maximize the client's investment if we can stick around and help them, whether it's through web design or social media guidelines or creating advertising templates. There's just a lot of ongoing creative needs they have. And so we've really focused all of our energy there because our clients, while most of them are doing actually pretty well, they are facing challenges and disruptions too, and trying to figure out how to do different things online, different things in a distributed manner. And so they have creative needs there. And it does feel a little bit like things are starting to turn around a little, and people are making decisions a little bit quicker now, but the summer was long.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been pretty busy.
We've been really busy.
Yet you have found time to write a book.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your book, about the naming book, and why did you decide to do that?
Well, as I mentioned, we naming was one of those things that we felt like we were good at and we could make money doing. We didn't set out to do it. Again, I didn't know naming was a job that someone could have, or I would have been interested in it. So a nonprofit was making a major pivot. They hired us to come in, create a new name for this, or for the new organization, and we did it. It was fun. It was super challenging, but it was really energizing. And so from there, we kind of had a referral to more of that type of business. And over time, I started to realize that I needed to somehow make it a little more systematic, because we were really just relying on intuition and sort of like good hard work and what ultimately kind of felt like good luck. And so I started reading everything there was in kind of the popular business book sort of things about naming. And most of them were either kind of a history of brand names, which is interesting, but if you're an entrepreneur or if you're trying to create a name, it's not very helpful. Or it was someone who was an expert in naming, and it was kind of what they like, which again, it's helpful to understand what makes a name good, but it doesn't help you create one. And so I started looking at some of the academic literature, what makes words more memorable than others, what sort of processes are people using to create names. And I set about really initially to create a process internally to hand off to whether it was subcontractors or people on the language team to just help them more efficiently create names and generate ideas. And then as it kind of grew bigger and bigger, I kind of realized that maybe there was actually a gap. And if we're having such a hard time as experts figuring out what this process should look like, what about the entrepreneur who really doesn't want to learn anything about naming? They really, frankly, just want to come up with one good name, forget about naming process, and then move on to the 1,000 other problems that they have trying to put their business together. And so as I kind of pivoted from this internal asset to really thinking about that entrepreneur was really the primary audience, is, the person who's going to come in, they want to spend as little time as possible and get the best name possible. And so the process is set up to help you walk through 5 steps and really do just that.
So share a little more, if you can, about those steps. The book is very process oriented.
Yeah.
So share a little bit about that process.
Sure. So I think there are kind of 3 hard things about naming. One, most people skip over it altogether, is developing the criteria to decide what makes a name good or bad. And it's just, we don't even think about it. We're so totally like surrounded by names that we don't think like, why do I like this one? Why do I not like this one? Because we associate it so strongly with the products that they make or the services. So the first step is exactly that. How do you build out the criteria to determine, at the end of the day, how am I going to decide? And each business, this is unique. It needs to, there are a lot of considerations. What makes a name more memorable? What makes a name fit into a particular industry or stand out in a particular industry? And strategically, why would you want to stand out or fit in? And there are good reasons for both of those, but it just depends on what you're trying to do. A big one is, how much competition will your company likely have? If you're trying to sell a fitness product online, the competition is endless. So the name that you're going to come up with is probably either going to be really weird or really obscure, because you're going to need to trademark it, protect the trademark. If it's a local business, it can probably be a little more general. So criteria is first. The second hard thing is generating ideas. Most of us in our education in general are taught to kind of converge on the right answer. So we're kind of taught this kind of convergent thinking model, where really naming isn't like that. If you're looking for one word, it's going to be really frustrating and fruitless. What naming as an exercise is an exercise in divergent thinking. And so the middle 3 steps are all about teaching you how to do better brainstorms, how to do better research, and kind of like what kind of things are you looking for? How do you turn off that editor so you can just create ideas and ideas and ideas? Because really, the more ideas you have, the better end product will be. There's a book about creativity, and there's a good example of 2. It's a pottery class, and this class is split into 2 groups. One group is trying to make the one single best piece of pottery. The other group is graded on all of the stuff that they make, how much it weighs. And the interesting thing is the group that was graded on the quantity also had the best quality at the end of the day. And so I think that same kind of analog works most creative settings and is especially true of naming. And then the last one, which initially I didn't even really think of this as one of the hard things, but it is how to decide, so you have a lot of ideas, you have your criteria, and then it's like everyone has an opinion. You're in it super deep. You're second guessing yourself. How do you make a good decision? And so the last one is about how to kind of like transition from that divergent thinking to being really critical and deciding on the name that's going to really be the most strategic, best choice for your organization.
Yeah, I struggle with the whole naming process, so this would be very helpful for me personally. Let me stop for just a second. Make sure that if you all have questions as you're watching online, feel free to put those in the chat window of the Facebook stream, and we will take a look at those, and I will add those to the questions as I am sharing questions with Brad. So when you work with a customer,
Mm-hmm.
I assume that you all probably use this type of process. How many names do you give to a customer to decide from?
Sure. So in the naming process, we definitely take our own medicine, so to speak. So we create the criteria with the client. That's really important to get them to understand how we're going to make a decision, and we just need their input on what's important to them. Then we go generate ideas. We try to have 200 to 250 ideas after that ideation phase. And from there, with an initial pass through the criteria, we can usually cut it down to about 30. And then we go to an internal group. And what I do is I'll kind of show all of them, and I'll to our other coworkers who are a mix of designers, developers, project managers. So it's good because they have a wide kind of range of experience and perspective. And so what I'm really looking for is I want to get their kind of first like initial response. Like, does this feel like the best name or the worst name for this organization? And so I have them rank it on a scale from 1 to 10, from worst to best. And then I kind of tally the results. And that gives me an idea of how people are going to respond to these names. And from there, we'll go to, I want to look at, in that industry, how much competition will these names likely have? And so there's some simple things like Secretary of State has a website where you can look and see if anyone's registered the name. There's a resource, the Patent Office, which is uspto.gov for the trademarks. And you can look to see how many there are. And I'm not a trademark attorney. You need to hire someone to do that, but you can get a sense if a name has, are there 9 other ones or are there 900? So you kind of want to get it. That gives you a sense of like, is it going to be possible or not? And then we just want to look at the landscape generally. What other names exist that people might confuse? And this doesn't always kill the name, because if there's not something confusing in the industry, it can work. But you definitely want to know if there's some strongly negative thing that you just want to be prepared for. It's like, oh, well, I've heard of that, and that reminds me of this other terrible thing that you don't want associated with your business.
So going through this process with a client, how long, or even somebody taking the book and reading through it and trying to work through it, how long from start to finish does that usually take?
It definitely takes a little longer with the clients, because walking through the decision-making process, just the more people involved, the longer it takes. And if someone listening is representing a bigger company, and maybe you're in a marketing department and you're trying to name a product or a service or something, it might take you a little longer to kind of bring everyone along. But for a solo entrepreneur reading the book, I mean, the book there are some anecdotes and some background to give you context and to help start thinking about the book. But really, it's oriented towards working through. I mean, I think someone should be able to work through it if they can focus on it a little in less than a couple of weeks, a month at the most.
Once you go through that internal naming process before you present it to a client, first of all, how many options do you give the client? Clients are, at least in my experience working with customers, they're notorious for making decisions. Yeah. So how many options do you give them, and how often can you even look at those options and guess correctly which one they'll choose?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you gave someone 200 options, that's not that much better than having zero options. It's just like doesn't, it's not very helpful. So we try to hit right around 10 seems like the sweet spot for us. Sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 12, but we feel like if it's much more than that, it's just hard to figure it out. And we also try to pitch. One thing I didn't talk a little about, but when we're generating names, we try to generate names across different name types. So when you're thinking about names, you're thinking of real words like Apple, made up words like Skype, compound words like Facebook, affixed words like Spotify, kind of their category called like smushed together words like Pinterest. So there are lots of different types of names. And so we really want to pitch the client name ideas across a pretty wide spectrum. And I feel like with 10, you can kind of limit it to your best ideas, but still have a pretty wide kind of aesthetic range.
Yeah, well, that certainly makes sense. How often do you know your clients well enough that you can guess which one they pick? Or
No, we always guess, and we almost always guess wrong. It's it's always surprising. Yeah, it's and most of the time, because you're picking if it's a new business, you don't have people are kind of waiting for that aha moment. And so it just rarely comes, which is why the criteria is so important, because you have that kind of like feeling of like where you have a strong affinity for a name with companies because of all of the other things that come along with it. You think you like the name, but you probably like the customer service, or you like how it looks, or you like, I mean, there's all the other, where with a new company it doesn't have any of that. And so it just, most of the times off the bat, a new name just sounds kind of weird and a little uncomfortable, but you just have to trust the process and go with it. And when you grow into the name, you start to realize, looking back, a good decision really only makes sense in retrospect, I think.
yeah, that makes sense. Last question about the book. In the book, you talk a lot about the process, but you
Mhm.
don't actually talk much about names. Why is that?
Well, yeah, a lot of people, the first question when I tell someone what I do, they always ask, "Oh, what's your favorite name?" And I think just as like a generally philosophically, like what I like just doesn't really matter that much. If it hits the criteria, if it resonates with the client and what they're trying to do, then it's going to resonate with your customers, and it kind of doesn't matter. I give an anecdote in the book about walking through the freezer section, and I'm looking for some food so that I can send with my kids to school. And if you go through the freezer section of a big grocery store, there are like 200 freezer doors. It's like an impossible choice to try to figure out what you're going to get. And I happened to stop in front of the burritos, and there's this one name stuck out, and the name was really strange. I didn't exactly like the name, but I paused for long enough to look at it, and I thought, oh, my kids will probably eat that. And I bought 5 or 6 of them. So it's like sometimes the name, all you need it to do is have someone pause for just long enough to think about you. And if it does that, the rest of the packaging, the design, the contents of what you're trying to do, all of the other stuff around the brand can kind of fill in the gaps and go to work for you and hopefully convert to a sale, which is the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have one last question. It's amazing that we are already coming up at the end of our time. Just one last parting advice, tip, suggestion that you would have for an entrepreneur that might be listening to us this morning.
Yeah, I almost actually said it earlier, and as I was thinking, I think if every business book gives you the same advice, which is focus, focus, focus. And while I think it's good advice, I think it's important to remember that focusing is a luxury. That when you're starting off, sometimes, or if you're going through a time like now where things are difficult, there are periods in your business where you might have to do things that you wouldn't normally do to keep the business going. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice is don't get discouraged if it feels like you can't focus right now, because focus is a luxury of having money, and it comes with time, and over time it's essential, but don't put too much pressure on yourself.
I think that's sound advice and good piece of advice for us to finish on. Again, our guest this morning, Brad Flowers, thank you very much. He is the partner at Bullhorn Creative and author of the naming book. We certainly appreciate your time this morning. And if you have questions that didn't get answered today, please still put those in the chat, still share, post. We will, if we see other questions throughout the day or throughout the days ahead, we will certainly try to get those to Brad and still try to get those answered for you. Again, make sure you share it. If you want to be in the drawing for your free copy of the naming book, make sure that you share the video as well. And again, thanks to our local partners, Hopkins County Innovate and Caffeinate, Murray Callaway County Innovate and Caffeinate, and Christian County Innovate and Caffeinate. And on behalf of our local partners in Grow West, thank you all for joining us today. We will be back here next week, same time, 8:30 Central Time on Wednesday for our next entrepreneurial speaker. I hope you come back and join us next week. And with that, thank you all very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.